Hey guys, my name's Porsh. If you don't know who I am, that's totally fine. I never post. I'm a makeup artist, a self-taught makeup artist from South Australia. I live in Adelaide. In today's video, I was going to try and do my makeup at the same time as I talk about something paranormal. If this is something that you're interested in, then I would highly suggest that you hit the like button, leave a nice comment and subscribe. And thank you so much for watching. If you do have any questions, just leave them in the comments box below and I can answer any questions. But other than that, I'm gonna get started with the video. Okay, so today's story takes us back to the year of 1957. And just to put a little bit of perspective on where that looks like in the grand scheme of things, black and white TVs were now considered affordable to the everyday American family. Jailhouse Rock was on top of the charts by Elvis. President Eisenhower was in the White House. This intergalactic traveler defied every conceivable idea that we had at the time of time travelers from outer space, because we hadn't even made it to the moon yet, which is so crazy to think about. It wasn't even that long ago. Now, this intergalactic traveler could speak any language you asked him to without even thinking. Whether it be French, German, Portuguese, he didn't even have to think, which I just think is so crazy. Little sidetrack. I'm trying to learn French right now with Duolingo. This is not sponsored, I wish. And I went to school learning French. I get it mixed up with Italian, so don't even ask me. So he could speak any language you asked, and he could even tell the future, which is even crazy. But I think the most insane part about this was he looked like a regular human, which is just so crazy, because like patting down some eyelid primer. Now his name would be revealed as Valiant Thor, so that's who the story is about today. Now you may not believe this story because there's only one photo of him out there in the whole of the internet, and this, I guess, of him, this being, I guess you want to say. Anyway, and there is one book about him, and that one is famously named Stranger at the Pentagon, ironically. Yeah, his identity was verified by someone from the US Navy security clearance team, sorry, the former Canadian Minister of Defense, President Eisenhower, and his granddaughter. Does this sound bizarre? Because you have no idea what this story is going to entail. So today's story starts at 8 AM on the 16th of March, 1957, like I said before. It's about 20 minutes away from the White House, and there was a paddock of crops in Alexandria, Virginia. Now that morning, a giant metal saucer-like object started descending from the sky and was quoted to be, without a doubt, not from this planet. Now, there's no information on who was exactly the first person to call up and say like, I found something. Anyway, there's no information just, you know, into place who exactly found and spotted this item first. However, police were eventually called to the scene and 2 officers arrived. Now, the craft eventually landed, and the 2 officers had drawn their weapons in self-defense, as it was clear that whatever this thing was, it wasn't from Earth. However, what came out of this flying saucer was not your typical Hollywood alien. You know, usually you picture green, bug-eyed men. No. In fact, he didn't look like this in the slightest. In fact, he was 6 foot, muscle definition, carved for the gods. This man looked like a human. In fact, he walked off, smiling and waving, and he just walked off, just like that, just walked off. Despite looking and talking and acting like someone from this world, the only thing that was suspicious was his clothing. He was wearing like this jumpsuit, right? And it was made out of this odd golden material, and it was so strange in the regard that it had no seams, no zippers, no Velcro, nothing. It was like fitted to his body like a glove. It looked like it was painted on. Valiant's first words were famously, I mean no harm, and second of all, I need a meeting with President Eisenhower. And what's even stranger, he communicated this all telepathically. So he didn't even say anything. He was like, like, you know, mind to mind where you don't talk. Now, the police didn't question his requests. There's no saying that like he was like this was out of fear. Like he seemed like really friendly. So they put him in the back seat of the patrol car and headed straight to the Pentagon to meet President Eisenhower. Now, when they arrived at the Pentagon, they were greeted by the Secretary of Defense, almost as if they were expecting his arrival, along with 6 armed guards to guide him through the halls of the Pentagon. All of them go into like an elevator that takes them straight down to the basement of the Pentagon. And so it's kind of like, I guess you could think of it underground. He's been transferred to like a subway kind of thing. Not like Subway, but like, you know, New York subway. Stay with me. I know this is really weird. So anyway, apparently that this subway connects from the Pentagon to the White House. As far as we know, this doesn't actually exist. But I mean, it would not surprise me if it did. You know, I think that would make a lot of sense if it did. Because, and it would be kept a secret for certain reasons, like carrying some of the most important people in the country who make very big decisions, you know. So I wouldn't really say that it wasn't real. I think it makes a lot of sense. Now, once they arrived at the White House, this visitor is taken straight to the Oval Office of President Eisenhower, and he gets up and greets him with open arms, almost quite literally, like he jumped up and shook his hand. Now, he then asks for his name, which he comes to find out his name is Valiant Thor, or Val for short. Val comes to tell President Eisenhower that he has traveled from planet your Bible calls the Morning Star, or Venus. President Eisenhower then asks if Valiant can prove that he's from outer space. And Val says, sure, come have a look at this giant spaceship I brought with me. Now, President Eisenhower goes to tell Val that, like, unfortunately, as much as he would love to, he can't just willy-nilly jump out of the office. You know, he has certain security measures that he has to adhere to. You know, he can't just be missing when there's an alien around, you know, that's kind of suspicious. He reiterates that he can't visit, but he would love to. But just as he says that, Richard Nixon actually comes into the White House office, storming in, and he greets Val like some sort of old friend, which I think is so strange. And after some banter, Val basically explains that he needs to discuss why he's here. Valiant Thor then mentions that he was sent by the High Council. I know, it gets really crazy. Bear with me. The High Council is basically an alleged committee of intergalactic beings keeping an eye on the less intelligent beings of the universe. And he essentially says that he is on a mission to speak with the military leaders and convince them to deactivate their nuclear weapons, because this could be huge. Now, he mentions that this is not just a problem for Earth alone, but for the entire galaxy. And I think this is very strange that he knew he wouldn't be brushed off by the president as some load of BS, that this president would actually sit there and listen to him. Keep in mind that this president had a history of conspiring with aliens, allegedly, which I will quickly explain for you now. So in February, a couple years before, in 1954, Eisenhower was out on vacation in Florida, and he went out for a meal and didn't come back. Keep in mind, this whole incident is reported. He did disappear, but the story gets a bit skewy when we try and think about where he went. So yeah, he told his colleagues that he had chipped his tooth on like a chicken bone and needed emergency dental work. Now, there are a fair few people on record who believe that this was actually a cover story for what he was actually doing. Apparently, or I should say allegedly, he was rushed to the Edwards Air Force Base, which is located 2 hours in Palm Springs, but he like apparently vanished and was found like 2 hours away. So like I said, remember, this definitely happened, but where he was is unaccounted for. Now, this is where the allegedly comes in. that allegedly waiting for him, there were two extraterrestrials wanting to come up with some sort of bargain or a deal and this was meant to be supposedly the first of many meetings like this to take place. And in this meeting, they made an agreement on the American citizens and the extraterrestrials called the Greada Treaty. Essentially, this treaty had terms, like every sort of treaty does, but the terms on this one were kind of funny. The terms that were allegedly agreed on were that they gave the United States of America some of their advanced technology. So in this treaty, the aliens would give some advanced technology, and in return they would get, if they could abduct humans for experimentation of their own, which allegedly President Eisenhower agreed to these terms as long as the names of the abductees were reported back to the UFO Research Committee. Keep in mind, the year is 1954 and the US is still in the middle of a Cold War with the Soviet Union, and this was a huge technology race. Huge advantage. And if you think this is a load of bullshit, which I don't blame you. Two, you can actually look up that there was a rise in alien abductee claims beginning in the 1960s. Now, let's bring it back to Valiant Thor being in the White House. So we're going back to the White House. Now, back in the White House, they're having these conversations to dismantle all the nuclear reactive war materials, not just in the USA, but among the whole of planet Earth. Eisenhower said he isn't going to make any promises. However, he said that he was willing to try. In the meantime, the president gives Val a pretty lush apartment within the Pentagon, so he is safe. Now, Val returned his favor by helping the country's top scientists on topics from everything from space exploration to travel, even medical research. However, the scientists were more interested in Val, which is like fair enough. They put Val towards some tests because he is an alleged intergalactic being, and they discovered that his IQ is well over 200 points. Now, to put this into perspective, the average person who has an IQ is usually around 100 points. Stephen Hawking's allegedly had an IQ of 160. So this was a very smart man. Now, do you remember when I started talking all about like his gold jumpsuit? Well, the scientists decided to put his jumpsuit to the test. They used everything from a diamond drill to a high velocity rifle, acid, even a laser to try and penetrate this fabric. They couldn't cut it no matter what they threw at it. Now, it might kind of sound like Val was being used as a science experiment, but he was treated very much like a guest. Remember, he was within the Pentagon and in the White House. Val was getting a little bit cocky with his time on Earth. He even rounded up some of his other beings that came with him on his spaceship and even went to a UFO convention. They started showing off. Keep in mind that no one knew who he was outside of the Pentagon, and these beings were totally there to stir the pot, really. They totally wowed everyone at all these conventions. Well, I'm not sure how many they went to, but they went to one convention, that's for sure. And they wowed everyone with their abilities, even showing off the fact that they could speak any language, like I mentioned. And this is where it gets interesting. There was a film taken of Val himself. Now, about 60-ish kilometers away from this convention, or 40 miles since we're talking about the States, we meet Dr. Frank Strangers. Now, he's in the process of currently writing his next book, Flying Saucerama. Now, a little sidetrack, I'll tell you a little bit about Dr. Frank Strangers. Now, Dr. Frank is a Christian minister and author. Although he's a very true Christian man that keeps strong to his faith, he has degrees in criminology as well as psychology, among many more. He has also spent some time being a private investigator while being extremely interested in UFOs. I'm just going to put on some lashes. So I guess you could say that this man has had a very interesting life. Now, I just done my lashes off camera. Sorry. Hey, Dr. Frank gets a call from his friend August Roberts. Now, August is also the one that snapped the photo of these so-called extraterrestrials at this convention. Can you see where I'm going with this, right? Apparently, before Frank can even say hello when he answers the phone, August bursts out and says, I met some extraterrestrials and I got photos. He also mentions that, I'm not kidding, I'll come over and show you myself if you don't believe me. So fast forward a little bit later, same day, August goes and gets the photos developed, and basically as soon as they are developed, he takes them straight over to develop to himself, to Frank. Now, he shows them to Frank's face, and Frank is just kind of confused because they look like regular people. Frank was just like super confused, like they looked like regular humans. But he knows that August is very reputable, like as long as he's known him. So he puts a little bit of trust in it, but he got like this overwhelming, I guess, feeling, you could say, when he was looking at this photo, like an intuition to sort of say that, like, I have a feeling that one of these people are very important. Like maybe, I guess you could call it like a sixth sense. Anyway, he was bedazzled by this photo. Frank even asks to keep a copy for himself. Now, fast forward to 1959, Frank is on a press tour, I guess you could call it, promoting his latest book. And he, ironically, is doing this in churches to try and spread the word about extraterrestrials being more connected with humans than what we think they are. Keep in mind, and he was from what the Bible calls as the North Star, or the star, which is Venus. And Dr. Frank believes that UFOs are fallen angels sent by God to improve mankind. He believes that this is actually backed up by the book of Ezekiel, which has a mention of a wheel inside of a wheel hovering over the land. Now, while he's doing this presentation about why his beliefs are so strong, along with the photo that our friend August took to prove that they are not all green, 5-footed men with black eyes and something to fear. Keep in mind, while he did this, it was all around America while promoting his book. While Dr. Frank was in DC, I guess you could call it like a press tour, like I said before, he was approached by this woman called Nancy, and Nancy was quite shy, but she showed a Pentagon ID and asked if they could have a chat in private. Nancy asks Dr. Frank if he would like to meet the man in those photos that he's been showing everyone around America. Of course, he jumps on this opportunity and says yeah. So Nancy says she will meet him outside of his hotel at approximately 8 a.m. the next morning. So fast forward, 8 a.m. the next day. The next morning, Nancy arrives in this big blacked out truck to pick up Dr. Frank and take him to the Pentagon. Now, when they arrive, they don't even go through a front entrance. They go through sort of like a secret passageway. And they got past security. They didn't even have to show any identification or show any credentials at all for why they were there. Once outside the Pentagon, they came across a false sort of door that was unmarked. So I guess it was meant to be like missed by like the average person. However, our friend Frank goes into this room and sees 3 military men going over what looked like very important legal documents. From another door within the room, out comes our friend Valiant. And Val introduces himself and tells him the reason that he's there. And there is a reason why Nancy brought him to the Pentagon to meet him. And allegedly that this reason was he needed someone who was open to the idea of extraterrestrials and beings and life outside of planet Earth while having a devout Christian faith. Yeah. This is when Val drops a bombshell that Jesus is a space alien. Yeah, I told you this gets weird. Remember, this is nothing new to Dr. Frank because he's written all these books with Bible intertwined with space and so on. And then Val goes on to remark about how God is unhappy with mankind. However, he has not lost all hope yet, and that hopefully Frank can be, I guess, like an informant or like a messenger. That mankind can return to the Lord if done successfully, and Val will happily exchange the secrets of the universe. While having this conversation though, he reiterates the fact that yes, there are indeed life on other planets. And to solidify these facts, he then goes on to confirm all these facts about Frank that Frank doesn't even know himself. Now we assume it's like family heritage because at the time, Frank himself didn't even know if these were correct information. It was never disclosed what it was, but it turned out to be correct. So I think I read that it was assumed to be family heritage stuff. But whatever it was correct. And now there's not a lot out there at the time on Valiant Thor because this story was kept so tightly under the wraps at the time, considering in the 1950s he was an alien in the Pentagon. Like if that is hard to imagine now, imagine it then. Now Val's exact instructions were from the High Council were to remain there until the 16th of March 1960. Now Val is realizing he's probably not going to complete his mission successfully as the time is going by very quick while he's here. The mission was to put a halt to nuclear war. Keep in mind that apparently President Eisenhower had made a few attempts to persevere this message with this Secretary of Defense, along with some other higher-ups. And apparently they canned this message because they were afraid that if the world had found out about Valiant Thor, they wouldn't follow presidential advice or whichever government's king or queens govern the land. They were also scared that Valiant Thor would turn this essentially into a show. However, Dr. Frank is up for this message to be delivered, but they were afraid that sort of Valiant Thor would turn it into a shit show. However, Frank is up for this message to be delivered. He leaves the Pentagon that day feeling unsure of all the information he's just taken in. Like, remember, Valiant Thor has just confirmed all these theories and thoughts that he had were true. And if he doesn't pass on this information, the fate of the universe could be on his shoulders if he doesn't do it correctly. Fast forward again to 16th of March 1960. Valiant Thor allegedly returns off into space in his spacecraft. And then we're going to hit fast forward again. Fast forward again to November of 1967. Frank was invited to speak at a UFO convention and he's trying to convey his message of Jesus being a space alien and that the nuclear war can impact the entire galaxy. And he actually builds up a little crowd of his own doing these talks. Now, after his arrival, he has a few interviews, one being with an Italian magazine. The two interviewers were told to be very intimidating men that watched over him while he had some soup and asked for like all the details on meeting Valiant Thor. You know, what did he look like? Where did he come from? What did he arrive in? What were the agreements? Etc, etc, etc. And with each of these questions, their tone of aggression became more prominent. So like they were getting more aggravated with every question, I guess. So now the maid came over to the interview and told Frank he actually had a phone call. Now Frank answers the call, yep, comes back, and the two interviewers are gone. In the interim, they pissed off, whatever. Now Frank, assuming, okay, yep, the interview's finished, let me finish my soup. He noticed it tasted different, and then within a couple seconds later experienced some excruciating pain. And his life was sort of flashing before his eyes and he realized, fuck, have I been poisoned? Keep in mind that he's in Germany for an Italian magazine having an interview, so there is of course an interpreter there. The interpreter runs over to try and help him as best as he can at this stage while Frank is wheezing, can hardly breathe, coughing up blood. And again, it's gonna get weird. Again. This interpreter pulls out this little vial from his pocket and mixes it with water and tells Frank to drink it. Moments later, Frank falls into a very deep sleep, but he wakes up feeling completely fine. Like he totally just didn't get poisoned. And he asks his translator, how did you know? I would need that. and his translator just kind of acted stupid, and Val was asking questions like, what was in it, how did you know I was going to need it, etc, etc. The translator then says he has no idea what he gave him, but he said he got a phone call prior to the interview saying to take this vial from the lab because the interpreter was also a medical student and this substance would be needed, and how to administer it was all within the details of the phone call. But before he could even finish, as in Frank saying like who, what, where, this hotel phone rings, and who else to keep an eye on him than our friend Val. Now Val says, Frank, I thought I told you to be careful. And that Val then goes on to tell Frank that he will need to proceed with extreme caution throughout the rest of his trip and that they will meet up one day soon. Fast forward again 7 more months. Val is on the line again, and Val tells Frank to fly out to San Diego ASAP. When Frank arrives, he sees Val just out waiting for him in baggage claim. Val then helps Frank with his bags into what seemed to be a rental car, and they head south towards the Mexican border, where they then arrive in San Felipe, I think it is, where they then get onto a boat and they cruise for a while until Frank sees a huge metal saucer floating above the water. Now, as they get closer, this saucer begins to open up inside and Frank is invited. Apparently he's told to get naked and go through some sort of sterilization process, and he's taken through to a buffet and is given like his own little jumpsuit to wear. While going through to this buffet, he notices that this buffet has every single earth food he's ever had, can ever think of, and this ship is huge. Apparently like there's a power plant, a cafeteria, a library, and there's also like, I guess like an auditorium where they can all stand around, like, and there's like a projector on the wall with like a TV and stuff, and they can see what is going on at any given day or time, planet Earth, the universe, whatever. They can find out what's happening. Now on this day, Bobby Kennedy was making a speech in Los Angeles. Keep in mind, Bobby Kennedy was one of the few politicians that Val allegedly had formed a connection with over the years. Allegedly, Bobby Kennedy even asked Val, would I make a good president? To that, Val said, yes, you would be a good president, but not right now, in 4 years. In the meantime, stay out of the limelight. However, while watching this screen, they were watching Bobby Kennedy make a speech, I think about his run for president. I'm not American, so don't come for me for that. And as soon as Bobby Kennedy came off the stage, he was shot live. Keep in mind that this feed that they're watching is live, and Frank is so shook because he can't believe what he's just seen. And some of Val's crew knew about this, and apparently, remember, they warned him, you know, not for another few years. And one of his crew members even piped up and said he should have listened to you, Val. This time he's been summoned to Las Vegas outside of the airport, and he sees 2 suited up men, very tall, waving him over to their limousine. However, these men are not what they seem, because these men take him out to the middle of the desert and throw him out, as well as beating him all within an inch of his life. And it is still not known if these men were the infamous Men in Black, or were they men hired by the government to shut him up. Like, no one's really sure. However, Val and his crew were not too far away. According to Frank, a white Cadillac pulls up with 2 men inside and fight off these Men in Black suits. And yes, they were Val's friends. Once again, this is not the last time Frank is nearly murdered. There's one more time where a car appears out of nowhere and tries to run him off the road. Now, this was very serious. His wife was in the car. She ended up being fine, but Frank, however, became paralyzed from the neck down, and the staff at the hospital were certain that he had suffered a broken neck along with the multitude of other injuries, including but not limited to his spine. Now, they aren't sure at this stage if his paralysis is permanent or temporary, but let him know that this will not be an easy recovery. And sure enough, as soon as he has been left alone in the hospital room, Val shows up once more. Val puts out his hand and magically heals Frank. Frank describes this as like a warm, tingling sensation all over his body, and all within a few hours, he's able to walk again. right out of the same hospital doors he once arrived in, paralyzed only hours before. His rapid and fast recovery baffled all the doctors at the hospital. Now, allegedly, Val and Frank wrote a book together called Outwitting Tomorrow, I think it is. And according to Frank, Val still spends more time on Earth than what you think he would. He is apparently outside of Las Vegas in a ship called Victor 1, which is meant to be invisible, and apparently it's not alone. There are always hundreds circulating the Earth, monitoring human behavior all over the globe. Now, as strange as this might seem, keep in mind that if this were a made-up story, how greatly it would benefit his own career, I guess, being the author of a paranormal or intergalactic beings and the universe and UFOs. This book has been mentioned to be very similar to a book called The Day the Earth Stood Still, which was like created in the early 50s, I believe. I could be wrong on that, don't quote me. But anyway, that is the story. There's not a lot of information out there, but let me know what you guys like. If you want to see more of this content, just leave it in the comments below. Other than that, thank you so much if you've made it this far. Thank you for watching, and I will hopefully be back with another video soon. Thank you so much. Bye.